and welcome to Always Take Notes.
Are you a professional writer struggling with financial difficulties? The Royal Literary Fund is here to support you. At the RLF, we believe that every writer deserves a chance to thrive, no matter what life throws your way. We offer a variety of hardship grants tailored to help professional writers in need, whether it's short-term relief or ongoing support. Perhaps you're dealing with an unexpected expense, a drop in income, or facing challenges that make writing difficult, such as illness, disability, or now relying on your pension. If you're eligible, our grants team will walk you through our discreet and confidential application process, ensuring you receive the support you need. Visit rlf.org.uk to check your eligibility and inquire today. The Royal Literary Fund. We believe writers matter because writing matters.
Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, we speak to the screenwriter Jesse Armstrong.
We spoke to Jesse about his early career as a screenwriter, about creating a global hit with Succession, and about his latest film, Mountainhead.
This interview was recorded live at the London Library. It's a great episode and we hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Jesse, to Always Take Notes at the London Library. Can we start with Mountainhead? It had quite a quick birth, I think it's fair to say. Tell us a little bit about how it was conceived and how it was brought into the world.
Yeah, so this is a film that we just made and was on HBO and is available in the UK on Sky and Now. It's about tech people, tech billionaires, 4 of them who get together for a weekend, and it came about. I was trying to write other things, and I wrote a book review of Michael Lewis's book about Sam Bankman-Fried, and that led me into reading more and more, especially tech biographies and books about Silicon Valley, and then the podcasts. And it was really listening to podcasts of some of the. They all go on each other's podcasts, so everyone who you can think of in Silicon Valley, you can hear almost all of them talking at length about what they think about everything. Not that I should criticise, but. And their voices became sort of insistent in my head, and in particular their tone of sort of imagined universal competence, that their admitted skills in like one area of business success were going to read across to having legitimate views which were worth applying to the world and were going to be quite readily applied to the world in other areas. And so that tone I couldn't get out of my head, and eventually I pitched to HBO that I think a plot suggested itself that these people could fit themselves into, and I wanted to do it in quite short order. So that was like in December, and then I wrote it fast after consulting with colleagues, and then we made it in February, April, March, and edited it quickly, and it was on by the end of May.
And this was your first experience of directing as well. What was that like? How did you feel taking on that challenge?
Scared. One of the other reason I wanted to do it quickly was because I was scared of directing, and I felt like get pushed out of the plane door rather than hovering forever at the edge. So I found it okay. Honestly, the most difficult day was the first day of being a director on set. Some well-known actors, ones who I admired a lot, and sort of taking up the role of being the director and telling them what to do or asking them to show what they could do. Just holding that position in the room, I found scary. After that, it became obvious that they were mainly incredibly decent and nice people, and we could just talk about things, and all the fear went out of it almost as soon as we'd spent some time just rehearsing together.
And how do you feel about the world of tech? I was struck by a quote from one of the characters where he sort of pokes fun at AI doomerism and accelerationist alarmism. Where do you stand between the doomers and the boomers?
I don't know. I mean, it's always boring to say, the film is the answer to that. But I guess the film takes a position on those positions, and probably more eloquently than I can. In a way, I read tons and tons about the subject. and then put it through the filter of trying to turn it into drama and comedy. A lot of journalists, especially when in the talking about the film publicity, people are very curious about what one thinks about the future and AI in particular. And I just feel like I'd passed the microphone to everyone in the room to answer that just as well as me. I mean, I read tons about it, but I've got no clue where it's going. Yeah, that's a bad answer.
We saw that you said that you see Mountainhead as more connected to Peep Show than Succession, even though there is this overlap of kind of ultra wealthy and stuff like that. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I guess maybe that's unduly provocative. It looks a lot like Succession. It's got these billionaires in it. It's American, and the cameras. So it is clearly got a relationship to Succession. But I guess what maybe might have surprised people, or it's quite tonally narrow. It's like it is quite a hard satire in a certain sense, and it sort of tries to be more funny than Succession does, probably line by line. And so it reminds me of the sort of tone of writing a sitcom in a way more than a drama ongoing drama where you have a bit more room to explore characters, and that's sort of what the audience I think want in the end in a continuing drama.
And how do you actually write dialogue, especially dialogue that's funny? Were you kind of cribbing it from the podcast because they were saying things that were so kind of ludicrous that you could just lift it pretty much word for word?
No, sadly, they don't do.
For libel reasons, no.
Well, they just don't. They don't talk like. Yeah, that would be great. But there was a lot of stealing, but mainly of language. Like a lot of writers, probably getting the tone, and particularly the linguistic tone of your characters, whether it's in fiction or in for a screenplay, was really, really crucial. So their technical language, which can seem ludicrous to an outsider, was really important to get into. I couldn't steal any bits verbatim, but what do? I just like all other writers, go and sit at my desk and sweat at it. But I do also use a writer's room, on Succession and for Mountainhead. It was only a week, but I talked to fellow esteemed writers, Lucy Prebble, John Brown, Tony Roach, Will Tracy, and if you get a funny group of people who are funny in a room, it wasn't that I got tons of lines from that, but I got elaborated situations that were going to be funny when I wrote the script.
And what did you feel about the reception that Mountainhead got?
I've largely kept my nose out of it. Reviews when they first come out are a little bit hot, sort of emotionally and creatively. So I tend to leave them. I do look at things, but I'm trying to leave them in the corner of the room to cool down a little bit before I get a family member to read things and give me a general impression of how things are going. And they know that they're to be a bit kind, but to give me basically how it's going.
Is this a system that's developed over time? You've kind of had a taster?
Yeah, I think it is very much. Yeah, I remember when me and Sam did Peep Show, we were running to the shop to see what the Guardian Guide and the Radio Times would say. I don't do that anymore because you might get a black eye.
We may come back to the new film in due course, but can we roll back now to your early life, growing up in the Welsh borders in Oswestry? We saw that you actually made a short film called No Caddish in Carmarthen years later, which was a kind of retelling of aspects of your childhood. Can you take us back to that period of your life and your initial interest in maybe in film and in America?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's not very autobiographical. There's a Woody Allen short story called No Caddish in something, I've forgotten it. But it's a young boy who's Woody Allen obsessive, and I watched lots of Woody Allen films when I was young. But and also at the climax of that short film, a sort of tough boy from school makes two boys stand next to each other so he can punch them both at once. And that did happen to me and my friend, but it was sort of very economical bullying. It was a good system he had, but yeah, apart from that, it's sort of fictional. But yeah, it's what's interesting to say about where I grew up, North Shropshire, Oswestry, a border town, and ask me another question because I don't know what to tell you about it.
Well, your father went on to be a crime novelist. Did he instill in you a love of books and reading and writing?
Yes, and a sense that writing was the sort of best thing you could do. You know, he was always trying to write a novel, going away to his office and getting lots of rejections, and then later, when I was getting to be in my late teens, he got a crime novel away with Collins, and it was a big moment for him and the family, and the sense of he was an English teacher, and so books were always important to him, and prose style, and he was forever angrily scoring the margins of books and tossing them across the room if he didn't think they were the prose style was up to it. He still does. So I guess that sense of like having a high hopes for TV and film and prose was instilled in me quite early.
And we saw that part of your interest in applying to the University of Manchester was to increase your chances of getting into the Hacienda.
I think that may be an AI hallucination.
So no interest in going to the Hacienda?
Yeah, we were in Shropshire, so it was like, that was where you tried to go out if you wanted to go somewhere better. You're from Manchester, but another generation.
Yeah, it closed before my time, sadly. Sorry.
But yeah, it was hard to get into, especially if you were travelling from a market town in Shropshire and wearing the latest clothes from Foster's. But yeah, I guess certainly like the allure of Manchester at that time, just after the Smiths, when New Order and probably Stone Roses were just at their height, and also nightclubs were thriving, was an attraction, but not specifically the Hacienda.
And can you tell us about your early exposure to America? So you were studying American studies, you had this year abroad at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. What were you picking up on those early trips?
Yeah, I went earlier than that because I was always, my parents both still live in Oswestry and I go back a lot and I'm very fond of it, but my abiding feeling about it, I guess early on, was getting out, or an unconscious impulse, because I kept on trying to make pen friends. I put an advert in Beatles Monthly looking for pen friends all across the world, and I think really I was hoping to get invited to go to people's houses. I met some Americans when I was relatively young and managed to get invited, and so I think I went at in the first summer of A-levels, so that's when you're 17. I flew to America and got the Greyhound bus from New York to San Francisco to make these people let me sleep on their floor. So yeah, I was. Yeah, I mean, America has changed what it means, hasn't it, violently and recently. But in that era, I guess it still had a bit of the post-war kind of. Well, it retains glamour, right, because of the entertainment industry and because of our cultural closeness. But it still had a bit of that really pre-internet, post-war glamour of your sense of the world was formed often by American movies and TV shows that seemed both close and other, and so getting towards that felt very, very, very exciting. And I was taken. I remember those trips vividly, and I like Americans. I like there's lots about their political and social and economic setups which are not the way I'd like a country to be run, but it's also full of people who I find unbelievably warm and interesting. So yeah, I guess that was when I first got interested in the US.
And while you were at Manchester, you met Sam Bain. Tell us a little bit about how that relationship took shape.
We met on a creative writing course, so if there's writers here, and I'm sure there are, and most of you are old or established enough to know how you want to work, but if there are younger people, I always think writing courses are good, and any opportunity to learn, even if you end up reacting against what your teacher is telling you or your criticisms of your classmates. Again, so we met on a creative writing course, and then did other jobs after university, but ended up writing letters to each other that made each other laugh. And he came from a sort of showbiz family. His father directed some of Upstairs, Down the Stairs, and his mum was an actress in Terry and June, amongst other things. And so he had a sense that you could earn a living in TV and film, which I guess I knew theoretically, but it never occurred to me as a thing you could do in life. So yeah, we started writing scripts together and got an agent, which is in TV, especially comedy, was like the important first step to getting in.
And on the podcast, we always love to get into the mechanics of how people made their first steps in the industry. So how did you guys get an agent?
Oh, the first we sent out the script to a list of agents who I guess, and this is what I'd recommend anyone to do when they're trying to get an agent, find the people whose work you admire, find out who represents them, and then approach them. And we did that. And we got some I remember at one early meeting where there was some very, very, very tentative interest, and we encouraged the agent to meet us. And when she said yes, we made sure it was at 1:00 so that we could say we'd had lunch with an agent. But we split the bill, so she didn't become our agent. But it was mostly, I think it was. I'm trying. What often people want to know, right, is do you have to be an insider? Do you have to have a connection to get in? We did in the terms of Sam's sort of sense of the world, but we got a good agent, Linda Seifert, who was a good comedy agent, another agent, and I think that was just through sending it to her.
Can you remember anything about the work that you sent to them as your kind of proof of concept?
Yeah, it was a sitcom quite similar in tone to Peep Show, a sort of flat share of two young men, but not without the sort of spin of in Peep Show you hear the two protagonists' internal monologues. It didn't have that, so it was maybe a little bit uninspiring.
And then you had 2 years working in Westminster. Could you tell us about that period and then how that ended up leading and contributing to The Thick of It?
Yeah, I worked for a Labour MP for a couple of years. He's a nice man, and I just don't think I was very useful for him. So I feel sort of bad when I look back. But I was a researcher, sort of I did a lot of correspondence, tried to write speeches. I was just deeply I was thinking about this. Why somebody was asking me if I was any good and if I would have been a politician, or they couched it in terms of like, would you have been, the other path untaken for you would have been being a senior politician, and it's just so not what would have happened to me. I remember seeing people like Liz Kendall come. She worked for Harriet Harman then, come and ask me questions, and I felt like a rabbit startled in the headlights. I was just deeply unpolitical. I had political sentiments, but I just didn't integrate. I remember going to the conference and wearing a yellow tie, and someone and me saying, "Why do people keep on thinking I'm a Lib Dem?" And going, "You're wearing a fucking yellow tie, you moron!" And the idea that you had to wear the colour of your team, it just felt like that's how unsubtle. I'm the red team, so I wear a red tie. I was just terrible at it. But I did just start doing some research for Rory Bremner's show, which was on at the time, satirical impressions show. And maybe that was sort of, it didn't lead directly, but it was allied to the comedy world, maybe made me realise even more that there is, like, you could earn a living doing this kind of thing. And its relationship to The Thick of It, it was sort of in a way coincidental, or it was not related in that Armando, I tried to write something about politics, but I couldn't get it right. Armando invited 3 writers, I think, initially, or 4, me, Tony Roach, Simon Blackwell, and Ian Martin, to help write this show. And I guess Ian knew about politics and wrote satirical stuff on a blog, but Simon and Tony were just British comedy writers like me from Peep Show, but it so happened that I did have a bit of a sense of that world, which was really useful to me when I started writing the show.
You mentioned speech writing. Were you trying to make those speeches funny? If we looked at a speech that you wrote back then, would we think that's the classic Jesse Armstrong bit of prose?
No, definitely not. There's somebody in the room who can do that sort of thing. I happen to know, but I could never getting the tone right for something like that is going to work for a mass audience out of the mouth of somebody who isn't a natural comic talent. I just remember always watching Prime Minister's Questions and reading Hansard and things like that. At that time, it was a long time after Jurassic Park, but so many things it seemed to be, I was forever watching speeches where someone would say, "He must be from Jurassic Park," as if this was like the killer cultural reference which was going to cement them in the public imagination.
And this is jumping around a little bit, but with Peep Show, so you'd had an earlier project, a reboot of a US sitcom called The 70s Show that didn't do so well, but tell us about how Peep Show broke out.
Breaking out, I don't know. It got recommissioned. You know, that was the big thing in those days, to get your show to get a second and then hopefully a third season, and that was, we had no idea how to do that. We did 2 pilots. I think pilots are great for anyone who's working in TV and film, or TV, so that you get to see the cast and you can refine things. It changed quite a lot between these 2 little 15-minute pilots that we wrote for Channel 4. We were writing very much we'd met David and Robert Mitchell and Webb on a BBC writing scheme, ill-fated, where they just got a large group of writers together and were under the impression that's how team writing worked, that you'd get like 7 people and they would do magic, and a great show like Friends would come out, which is absolutely not the way it works. You need somebody to go in and say, this is the show that we're all going to work on, and now you all give me your ideas of what could happen within it. So we'd met them doing that, and I guess I feel like it's a collaboration between Sam and I writing the scripts, but also very much we were writing for David and Robert's voices, who we knew by then, and that's an incredibly important part of the show, because getting that tone which I talked about, for Mountainhead or Succession, and really, we were writing sort of David Mitchell stuff for David Mitchell. Well, that character is different from David, but there's obviously some continuities in the sort of outlook.
You mentioned that early sitcom that was a similar sort of story. At what point then, doing Peep Show, did you have the kind of realization that you wanted to have the POV kind of element within it?
Well, right away, the original pitch was going to be 2 guys watching. A producer came to us with an idea, which was 2 men watching TV, a bit like the MTV bits, Beavis and Butthead, and it was going to be like a cheap format where you just showed clips, and you had these kind of studenty, they're not really stoners, David and Robert, but that would be the sort of vibe. They talk over this TV clips, and everyone realised it wasn't going to sustain as a show, so the idea of following those people out of the room and hearing their streams of consciousness was like, that's the added bit that'll turn it into a show. And in the first seasons of series of Peep Show, there is quite a lot of watching TV, but that element ended up dwindling away.
Could you tell us about your aversion to theatre, which comes up in Peep Show, but also appears in Succession with the whole car crash of Willa's play and things like that? Have you always hated theatre?
No, and now, as I've got more money from HBO and things, it feels increasingly unpleasant to be like a well-paid HBO writer giving a kicking to people who are like struggling to make great plays in small venues. So I think what happened, happens to lots of us, right, is you go to a play with a friend or relative, they've bought you a ticket, and you come out and you both agree that was great. You've spent 80 quid on that ticket or 50 quid on that ticket. It was great. That was great. And somehow also the reviewers, who are probably also fans of theatre, if it's, been a 2-star night, maybe it's a 3-star night. And if it's a 3-star night, it's a 4-star night. I think I've seen lots of things which haven't been quite as good as I thought they were going to be. And there's no escape, right? In the theatre. And when it's not good, it can be really not good. And also as a comedy writer, people are very generous with their laughs in a theatre in the way that they're not necessarily in a sitcom recording or other environment. So there were a number of factors that made me feel like you can sometimes have a bad night and the audience give easy laughs, and you think, you're laughing at that. You should see The Simpsons. It's gonna blow your mind. But when you have a good theatrical experience, it is like nothing else, and I work with lots of playwrights, and the way they learn craft and the way they learn in the best possible way to take themselves seriously and what they think about the world seriously, you kind of can get that ground out of you in TV and film as you dutifully do your rewrites, and so it's the most extraordinarily important part of the culture and feeds into film and TV in a really important way. So I feel very warm about it, but just I don't want to go tonight.
That's very diplomatic. But as a comedy writer and theatre hater, I think we can say, how do you feel about the comparisons with King Lear, Succession and King Lear? Do you think, really?
Well, I'm flattered. Yeah, I like going to see Shakespeare.
He's a good one. He passes. Stands the test of time.
I mean, yeah, of the plays, I'd rather go and see Shakespeare. But yeah, do other people find this as well? It's one of those things where a friend or partner might suggest, let's go and see Titus Andronicus in 3 months. And you're like, yeah. Never seen it, or maybe you've seen it once, so you read it. You're like, great. But then the night before, how do you feel about it?
Hello listeners, you may remember that a few months ago we made some improvements to our Patreon offering, refreshing our package of successful pitches for people who support Always Take Notes. Since then, we've been so delighted to see more people join up. We've loved hearing from you about how useful you found the package and the podcast, but we're really keen to keep expanding the benefits available to all the people who support us.
So with that in mind, we've added 40 new pages of material to the package, including pitches to the New York Times, the Washington Post and the BBC. This means the whole compendium now runs to a whopping 160 pages. And we're excited to announce that for people who contribute $10 a month, we're also going to start releasing bonus mini episodes. If you'd like to know what these will sound like, there's a sample episode with Lee Child that you can listen to for free on our Patreon now.
Thanks to the help of our sponsor, Scrivener, the first 10 new sign-ups at $10 per month will receive a lifelong license to Scrivener worth £55. This specialist word processing software helps you organise long writing projects, such as novels, academic papers, and even scripts. We're now down to 8 of them left, so if you're interested, check it out as soon as you can.
These are just a few of the updates we've made to our Patreon offering. So if you'd like to find out more about how to get your hands on an ATN mug, suggest questions for upcoming guests, or join a monthly call with us to workshop a pitch, head to www.patreon.com/alwaystakenotes. That's www.patreon.com/alwaystakenotes.
And thanks so much again for all your support so far. Could you tell us now about improvisation? So we saw that this was something that you kind of got into from Armando Iannucci and Chris Morris, and tell us about how it works with them and then how it's come to be part of your process.
Yeah, I think probably with Armando was when I saw how he worked with actors, and he has a very specific way of working. You'd always have a script, and he would get the actors in the rehearsal room, and a couple of writers and him would sit around and watch them do the scenes, and then he would toss in ideas and encourage them to play, and you would reincorporate lots of that stuff back into the script, and sometimes craft it a bit more, or sometimes it might go in verbatim, and that so you'd get this dialogue between the rehearsal process and the script, and then also on the day sometimes he would encourage people to do what the hell they wanted. And yeah, Peep Show, because of the camera style, and Dave and Rob never they're very, very funny, and they'd sometimes give us additional material, but when they were acting and doing that job and it was quite technical, they just didn't want to do that. It wasn't interesting to them, and because of the technical requirements shot brilliantly by Becky Martin mostly for all the latter series, you just couldn't do too much improvisation. I think on everything else, I've always felt, let's loosen it up. In particular, you get some good lines sometimes, but the most important thing is filmmaking can be quite a constricting, hierarchical process, quite almost bureaucratic, when you get the call sheet and the times and the days and anything that catapults you back into a feeling of creative freedom and playfulness is good, especially for a comedy. So even more important than somebody coming up with a great line, which does happen, is the feeling of you don't have to stand there if this scene isn't working. We're allowed. That's a really crucial one. Like we're allowed to say, like, this doesn't seem real, or it doesn't seem right. We can loosen it up. What about you if we move these lines to there, or you come in later, or does it feel weird because it looks like they can over here but they can't? And so you can manipulate the scene and make it feel fresh again in the room when you have an improvisational style, and then you can throw in late lines. But the most important thing is the freedom.
You mentioned actors occasionally coming up with great lines. Are there any that really linger in the memory for you?
Well, no, everyone's like an arrow in my heart because I want to write them all. So what particularly good? I don't know if is it. How sweary is your?
It's as sweary as you like.
I don't know if this even went in the show, but this is just one that I remember. It's not the funniest, but it was. Kieran was doing the scene in Succession. He's the younger sort of volatile son, and it was a big crowd scene at a wedding, Tom and Shiv's wedding, and I think it was because he was interacting with somebody who was a background artist, an extra, and he shook hands with them and then looked at his hands and said, well, these hands aren't going to fuck themselves, and walked off. I don't think it's in the show. People who know the show better than me will remember, but I don't know, I guess it was so unnecessary.
We'll come back to Succession in just a moment, but could you tell us, before we do, about your novel, Love, Sex and Other Foreign Policy Goals? What took you to that project, and what was it like, both writing in a different form, but also operating in a slightly different literary industry?
Yeah, I remember it being lonely and scary, and when it's going well, making a TV show can be a lovely thing. If the group is working well together and you're fond of lots of your colleagues, it's a bit like a sort of a building site that's working really well, mixed with a kind of party, and everyone has their job, but you fix problems together, and it can be really convivial and just creatively delightful. That's not the case, I found. Writing a novel, you're on your own, and it feels like a sort of long trudge to the North Pole, and you might die on the way, and no one will help you. That was my experience. It's just a lot of words compared to a script. It's useful insight. You might want to... You're not writing that down, I notice.
We'll put that one in the next book.
Ian McEwan didn't tell you that, did he?
You said in scripts that you often have not necessarily the ending in mind, but the feeling that you want to create with the ending. Was that the same with fiction, or did you kind of on that trudge to the North Pole?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how I would describe it. In that I'm not one of those writers who knows everything that's going to happen. It often start with a scene or a moment, a character moment, an incident that will kick the thing off. But I do need to know where we're going to go to feel confident enough to keep writing, and that was the case in the novel as it is in everything I've written, and what that specifically means for me is to know the tone of the ending, roughly where we're going to end tonally.
Turning to Succession now, a lot of the kind of discussion about it suggests it's inspired by the Murdochs, but it's interesting to see that you said they were part of it, but also Maxwell and also some of the Redstone. Could you take us back to the kind of beginning of the project, and then how it all became what it became?
Yeah, so the sort of a little bit like writing about Sam Bankman-Fried, who wasn't really. I don't think anyone thought of him as a central inspiration for the characters in Mountainhead. But the first impulse to read about media moguls was a documentary filmmaker who wanted to do something sort of straight, sort of business secrets of Rupert Murdoch, like a documentary or a faux documentary. And I tried to do that, but I couldn't. And so I ended up writing a thing set at his 80th birthday party, which was, then a fictional event that was yet to happen. And that led me into the research, reading a lot about Murdoch. And that project went away for almost, it just didn't get made. It was hard to get made. And so that went away. And then after the end of Peep Show, almost a decade later, I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, and I started reading other books in the area, Maxwell and some of the Redstone are particularly vivid figures, but also earlier press barons and powerful people. And it started. I'd always felt in the period in between that if you were going to do it, you had to do the real thing, that if you didn't do the actual Sun newspaper and Fox, that it was somehow fake and you were sliding away. But I changed my mind and felt like actually you could steal everywhere. You could steal all these stories, these personality traits that were interesting to explore, that weren't by any means all in Murdoch and certainly weren't in his kids. And it just gave you this tremendous feeling of freedom. So and I think especially in the early days, people would feel like it sort of really, really is about the Murdochs, isn't it? And they're probably the prime inspiration, and especially for the US TV network, which was a lot like Fox, and that's a central atmosphere of the show. They're clearly the most biggest inspiration. But Maxwell, I think people who know Maxwell and his story really well, and his two sons, who are frankly rather more similar to the sons in Succession than maybe the Murdoch sons. People could feel a lot of Maxwell in there for people who know about him, which is obviously more of a British audience than a US one.
So how did you create characters that felt true to what you'd read in your research, but also lived on their own independently of it?
I don't know. It's something that's that I find, I was going to say easy, I don't know, or it's a way that I work is a lot of research. I guess it's all writers, right? Whether you call that research living with your mother and father for 20 years or reading about Sam Bankman-Fried or Robert Maxwell, you take in these characters and then re-amalgamate them into new forms. And I like that process a lot. I guess I like the feeling of solidity you get from they start to seem more easily real people to me when I have a bunch of research in mind.
And you mentioned earlier the writer's room as part of the way you work, and Succession was written in a writer's room in Brixton. We've heard from other screenwriting interviews that this is a kind of classic difference between British and American TV, that America is very used to writers' rooms and Britain is much more a sole screenwriter. And we've often heard that that's largely for financial reasons, that there's just not the money in Britain to do that. Is that true in your sense, or is it a wider cultural difference?
Broadly speaking, it's true. I think the roots of it are financial, and also, the American TV model with seasons of 27, 32, 35 episodes just required a sort of industrialization of the process that we never did here with six episode runs. But I guess the only caveat to that is that writing rooms, I guess they get mystified a little bit because we don't have a tradition of them here, and so many of the good shows that we think of, from MASH and Taxi to Friends and The Simpsons, to come have them as part of their process, so it starts to feel like that's the reason they're so good. And it's one of the reasons they're good, because they get a lot of great writers in there. But really, a writer's room happens whenever another writer talks to someone else, whether that be a producer or a fellow writer. So every and they're very common in comedy. Every writing duo is a mini writing room. You're just doing what you do in a writer's room, which is talk about plot, talk about what's going to happen, occasionally come up with good jokes that you can put in. It's just that process writ large in a writer's room. So I guess that would be my only caveat to the sort of especially mystification of American writers' rooms is we kind of, every time you discuss a plot with someone, you're doing what you do in a writer's room.
And you touched on this earlier, but is it the case that you would kind of go into the room and say, okay, this episode, there's a big event being thrown, and then someone will come to you and say, we'll have a joke about the butter being cold? Is that kind of how it works? You kind of set the vision for the episode, and then someone else brings kind of little details and contributes, plot points?
No, it's much more flexible than that. I guess there's responsibility on me. I wrote the pilot, which is usually what the showrunner would do. So you're presenting, and in this case, it had actually been made, so you can show it to everyone and go, this is what we're trying to hit, roughly speaking. I do like this, I don't like that, a bit more of that, a bit more of this. And this is, and I think I would feel a responsibility to suggest, I think this is the arc of the season, and I think this might be the first episode and the second episode, but I'm really scared about this because I don't know what will happen in the third and the fourth. And a good, in my opinion, they could work innumerable different ways. I would say a good writer's room would encourage people to say, but I think that's where the end of the season is. And if you have a better idea, say, or what suggests to me some of the infinite possibilities I've excluded by going for that ending. Or if they say, why have you gone for that ending? I might say, it's because I like the tone of this relationship changing. So then might change the material facts of what happens, but still hit a similar tone. So I think you should invite yourself to be challenged on a much, much more basic level than just like, what's going to be in the fridge, because I've worked out everything else. Although you can work, sometimes you can feel like a jeweler who's, you're constructing a crown and inviting people to put little jewels into it, and there's a space here for some beautifully crafted jewel of a joke or an observation. But you, in a good writer's room, people will also be helping you craft the whole thing in its entirety.
Succession was a huge hit, and it won a lot of awards. But there was a strain of viewers who just said they've had it hard to watch because of the sheer unpleasantness of the characters. And you've talked elsewhere about your kind of aversion to the idea of growth, and how you're kind of skeptical of that, and the way that there's a kind of easy way maybe to hook an audience by having a character go on a quote unquote journey. Could you tell us about that? Yeah,
maybe in a good way. It's still unresolved in my own mind. I guess there is, like, if you read screenwriting manuals, it'll be like a film has, the character has to grow. That's what the audience wants, and so maybe it's a reaction against that leads into that maybe slightly aggressively provocative claim that people don't change. I think people do change, but what's interesting, I guess, or the room for manoeuvre for a writer, it seems to me, is like Michael Corleone is not going to go off and join the circus. Like, that would be a big change. Oh, great, he changed, but that's too much change, right? That's not what he's going to go and do, or it's a different, maybe an interesting movie, but people can have drug problems, alcohol problems, and then they change in life-changing ways and change their lives in those incredibly important ways, which are so consequential. But usually, if you know those people, they don't feel their essential nature has changed, and they can have compulsions and a relationship to substances and temptations that is just exactly the same that was when they were doing behaviour that was doing them so much damage. And so I guess the change that I'm interested in is the possible change, and how much, and that, I think that's just a great area for drama, which is what growth are we capable of, given that it's really, really, really hard?
Talking of sudden change, and anyone who isn't up to date with Succession, that's on you at this point. Did you know going into it that you were going to bump off Logan? I mean, the clue's in the title, but did you know that you were going to bump off quite early in the final season?
I thought that he might die at the end of the pilot, because I didn't know what else to do at the end of the pilot. And then I certainly thought he might die at the end of the first season. But when we were in the writer's room, and especially watching, as soon as we'd watched the pilot in detail, I realised how magnetic Brian Cox was as an actor, and the desire just on a very basic level to keep that character in the show. But also that I thought there was an interesting show once he was gone. And we did that for the latter half of the final season. But it became very apparent to me that having a sun in your solar system was what the show was about. It was about people who couldn't escape the orbit of this incredible power, and how you, even in the struggle against it, you reaffirmed how central it was to your whole life. And you could do it, but it might take a more subtle writer than me to make a whole series about that absence, about circling around a black hole. So we kept the sun in it for longer. But I did always know at some point there will be a succession. It was a sort of promise in the title. And then, yeah, when it seemed like to me like it was the time for the final season, yeah, I hope it wasn't tricksy or bad faith with the audience, but I wanted it to be a surprise, because death so often is a surprise, and so I wanted to replicate a little bit of that feeling in the show.
We talked earlier about how it's not just modelled on the Murdochs.
It's not.
But what was the response from the kind of wider Murdoch universe, both as you were trying to get it made and as it grew in profile?
I don't know. You got vibrations back, and Brian Cox tells a story about meeting Elizabeth Murdoch's husband in the street, and him saying it was difficult, and it's funnier when Brian tells it. But so I got a sense of vibrations, but some people thought that we had like moles inside that particular family, which we just didn't. And I'm as a writer quite a homebody, scared of people, would rather not go to a meeting, would rather stay at home. So if there were chances to meet people, we never got a chance to meet anybody in that family, but even people allied. Occasionally I'd meet someone in finance or high up in media and go to have a lunch or a breakfast with them. And it did used to feel always really compelling when you were in the room with them, as if you were learning some secrets of the world of power and money. And then when I'd look at my actual notes, they would be just totally banal about, be the winner, be the best, make the first move. Like wouldn't even make it the introduction of a really good business book, whereas the business books, and especially in long-form American journalism, is just full of stealable details that you can take and put in your TV show, film, or book.
It's a rule of the show that we always ask guests about money, so say as much or as little as you'd like, but how has it worked for you over the course of your writing career? How have you made it work?
Good, that's good. Somebody should just do a whole podcast where they ask people to talk about money, right? Because it's people. I bet you see your guest visibly tense up.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is the most relaxed a guest has been, probably.
Yeah, I guess it's particularly pressing for me because especially having done Mountainhead, which is about billionaires right after Succession, which was they're so rich. But I have had a lot of legitimate questions like, why are you writing about these people? I feel like I'm writing about their power, writing mainly about their power, and they happen to be rich too, but the rich definitely comes into it. And I guess there is an uncomfortable potential thing where I now work a lot in American TV where the rewards are great, and the puckish satirist pricking the bubble of pomposity while also pocketing a massive amount of money from HBO starts to sit slightly less comfortably. So yeah, I do think about that. I guess the thing you fear is the thing about celebrity is the mask that eats the face. When you earn a bit more money, you can, without realizing it, climb. Do you zorb?
Do you?
Are you familiar with the zorbing ball?
Familiar, yeah.
Well, you can accidentally, I think, climb into a zorbing ball of sort of wealth and find yourself bouncing around the place in a bit more invulnerable. They're those big inflatable balls that people roll down mountains in, and I think that's what you have to beware, becoming just a bit immune to how complicated and difficult things can be.
We're coming up to the end of our time now, so a final question from me is, can you tell us...
I just want to do zorbing from now on.
Totally
We don't know what to say.
No. Could you tell us a bit about your work process? So we saw that you go out to work, as it were. So you have an office, you go there, you leave your phone at home. How has that developed, and is that crucial for you?
It started to become crucial. I've got an office about half an hour's walk from my house, and I like to leave my phone at home and walk to work, and then that's when I feel that's a good day's work is, even if you waste it, most writers I know procrastinate too much. I certainly feel like I do, but at least you haven't looked at football transfers all day. You've at least looked out of the window. So that feels important. It also feels slightly fake because a lot of the time I'm sort of between projects, as I'd say I am now, and just going to meetings and meeting up with friends, and a lot of the time I'm in production when you're surrounded by a hive of people, often in a busy office, and a lot of the time it's just not possible, and you end up writing on airplanes or in cars and weird places. So I don't have the kind of writer's life that I might admire of very regular routine where I get up and 5:30 do Pilates and then walk to my office without my phone. But when I'm in a good writing groove, that is my ideal day.
I think you mean...
Not the Pilates and the 5:30.
Yeah, because it's doing zorbing and then doing the writing. Well, thank you very much, Jesse, for your time and for speaking so candidly. Wishing you the best with Mountainhead and all your other projects going forward.
Thank you very much.
That was the Always Take Notes interview with Jesse Armstrong. He's on Twitter at JesseArmstrong1, and Mountainhead is streaming now. Hello, it's us again. Rachel, what was your takeaway from the interview with Jesse?
It was a really enjoyable interview, not least because we got to do it in this beautiful room in the London Library. I think the thing that, two things that I took away from it was, one, the hilarious conversation we had about Jesse hating theatre. And we didn't drill into it, but it's also a theme of his novel, which kind of pokes fun at a student theatre group. And also the mechanics of running a writer's room, which obviously in Succession has been kind of famed for its end result. So it was great to ask him about that and about how that actually works in terms of the dynamics and who's leading it and how ideas are contributed and metastasized or metabolized, or, how that works together to produce a show such as that. How about you?
Yeah, it was a great event on a really hot evening in London, but in a lovely space. And thank you to Claire Berliner at the library for pulling it all together. I think I was thinking about this too, actually. And we did a Q&A afterwards, which we didn't record, but there was a hilarious question by a friend of mine asking what JP from Fresh Meat would be doing that very evening, which got a sort of frisson to go around. I mean, I think what struck me actually, maybe less during the interview itself, but as we mentioned on social media they were doing it and stuff, suddenly people who I hadn't seen for years were coming out of the woodwork going, oh my God, you're talking to Jesse Armstrong. And so the kind of depth of his fandom and how there are people who I wouldn't have taken to be a huge fan of his work who clearly are, and stuff like that. So a very sort of zeitgeisty, but also this thing that came up in the research that he's a nice man, right? Like that he treats the people
very much so.
that he's working with decently and stuff like that, and that very much came across when we were speaking
and after,
so,
when he stayed behind for ages to sign people's books. So yes, thoroughly decent.
It was very excellent to have him. Anyway, Rachel, what have you been up to and what have you been consuming culturally?
I've been, once again, reading. Yep. So now we're at the stage where we are winnowing down a list of 50 to what will become the long list. So in my case, there's about 25 of those 50 that are 26 that I've already looked at for this initial list of 50. But then there's a whole new heap of books that I have to assess. So it's doing the next stage of that, which is good fun. It's interesting to hear. It was the first meeting where everyone sort of swapped notes. So it's interesting to see what people like and what people don't like. And yeah, it's been enjoyable. How about you?
We should say that's Rachel's work as a judge for the Bailey Gifford
sorry.
Prize, for anyone who hasn't
Vital bit of context that was missing. Sorry, everyone.
That's okay. I am sort of elbow deep in this magazine piece for Vanity Fair, which is going well and seems to be starting to come together. I have been continuing to read this book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance that was a huge hit in the 70s, and I've slowed down a bit because some of it is quite boring, to be honest, but I'm pushing on.
Have you found a sense of Zen?
I don't know about that. And then actually, appositely, given the interview, we're about to watch the last half of the final episode of Succession tonight. So I hadn't quite got to the very end of that before we did the interview, but that has been good as well. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acomb.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our score is by Jessica Danheiser, and our graphic design is by James Edgar.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on X at Take Notes Always. We're on Instagram at Always Take Notes. If you'd like to support us on our crowdfunding page on Patreon, we're on there under Always Take Notes. And if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes or get in touch with us via our website, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.